Those who've been following games industry news will know that there's some stuff going down just across the board. People coming out with stories of abusive work environments or misconduct on the part of developers, journalists, just people in the games industry as a whole. Back in June 2020, we saw folks from IGN, former IGN bosses Steve Butts, Tal Blevins, and Casey Lynch exposed by a number of other IGN employees or ex-employees who felt abused by these individuals with the way they were treated and the like. A couple days later, we saw big names in the games industry like Chris Avellone, one of the most prominent writers in video games, be accused of misconduct. And this is just scratching the surface across social media. A bunch of people have come out with their own stories, but no company has been more in the spotlight amidst all this than Ubisoft. A bunch of employees began to come out with stories of how they've not only experienced this kind of abusive work environment where a lot of misconduct can happen, but that Ubisoft leadership have kind of become complacent in this and kind of just let it happen. And so here's an article from Screen Rant from June 25th, 2020 that details all of the Ubisoft employees who have been outed for abuse, and the list just goes on and on. Right here is a section on all of the employees who have been called out, allegations on Twitter that have been put out there by a number of existing or former employees. But I want to focus on a number of executives from Ubisoft in particular. Among the most prominent and high-ranking employees at Ubisoft who've been accused of misconduct were spotlighted by news outlet Bloomberg. Jason Schreier wrote the following article on two executives who were placed on leave following misconduct allegations, noting that these two are high-ranking employees under the scrutiny, named Tommy Francois and Maxime Belland, both vice presidents in the group overseeing development of Ubisoft's games worldwide. Now, a day before this article release, Ubisoft did post an update on all the allegations that have been pouring out from within the company. So this is a blog post from June 25th, 2020 that reads as follows. Concerning recent allegations raised against certain Ubisoft team members, we want to start by apologizing to everyone affected by this. We are truly sorry. We are dedicated to creating an inclusive and safe environment for our teams, players, and communities. It is clear we have fallen short of this in the past. We must do better. We have started by launching investigations into the allegations with the support of specialized external consultants. Based on the outcomes, we are fully committed to taking any and all appropriate disciplinary action. As these investigations are ongoing, we can't comment further. We are also auditing our existing policies, processes, and systems to understand where these have broken down and to ensure we can better prevent, detect, and punish inappropriate behavior. Honestly, when a company's higher-ups, the bosses, are complacent to an abusive work environment, the policies, processes, and systems don't matter if the people at the top are allowing abusive behavior and misconduct to take place. It's only now that Ubisoft as a company is starting to take these issues seriously, now that they've been called out for it. Now, many assume that Ubisoft would just make a blanket statement and then not do anything substantial about all of this. But there's actually been some major developments, with the most surprising of those being that Serge Hascoët, the most powerful creative force at their company and the man at the center of multiple recent allegations involving abuse and abating abusers, is resigning. Jason Schreier continues in this series of tweets. Top Ubisoft executives Yanis Mallet, head of Canadian Studios, and Cecile Cornette, head of HR, are also gone. Ubisoft is cleaning house. This is a huge deal for Ubisoft. Serge Hascoët was the man in charge of all of their games. With one word, he could greenlight or cancel a project. Many Ubisoft employees believed he was too powerful and close to the CEO to ever be ousted, no matter how many allegations emerged. Many people flat out thought there's no way in hell that Ubisoft will ever do anything about Serge Hascoët, given the amount of power and influence he has at the company, but Ubisoft full-on forced the man to resign, and the man is no longer a part of Ubisoft. He's probably going to land on his feet. He's just going to move to another company that's going to pay him millions and millions every year to do whatever it is he does. Like, that's the thing. Like, he isn't really suffering the consequences, but at the very least, within Ubisoft, he will no longer have that power to abuse employees and have just too much creative control over all of the creative endeavors under the Ubisoft umbrella. Jason continued, "Anyway, I have been spending the past few weeks talking to dozens of current and former Ubisoft employees about all this for a story that will be up in the near future. Most of them thought Haskowit was untouchable. This is a stunner." In an internal message to employees tonight, Yves Guillemot said he will personally oversee a complete overhaul of Ubisoft's creative editorial team, and that his goal is to create an inclusive and open culture that embraces more diverse and multidisciplinary expertise. Fast forward to July 2nd, 2020, and Ubisoft finally issued a more extensive response on their plans to overhaul their work culture to ensure stuff like this doesn't happen again. So in this blog post titled "Change Starts Today," they talked about how they want to specifically revise the composition of the editorial department, transform their human resource processes, and improve the accountability of all managers on these subjects, appoint a head of workplace culture, enact what they're calling employee listening sessions in all locations, launch of a global employee survey, ongoing investigations into allegations, comprehensive review of policies and procedures, diversity and inclusion. So these are sort of the big bullet points. And I'm not going to read through this whole article, but Ubisoft says that they're committed to really making the changes that are needed, whether this is all just PR fluff or whether they have genuine intentions to change things across the board. Only time will tell. But Ubisoft employees have expressed some optimism in that powerful individuals like Serge Haskowit, against whom multiple allegations have been levied, isn't untouchable and was able to be ousted from the company. More comprehensive details of Ubisoft's abusive work environment were relayed in this bombshell article from July 21st, 2020, also by Jason Schreier. He said, "Over the past few weeks, I've talked to more than 40 current and former Ubisoft employees about sexual misconduct and abuse allegations. Their accounts make one thing clear. Ubisoft has known about these problems for years." My new story. Among many details I learned while reporting this piece, the developers of Assassin's Creed Odyssey wanted Cassandra to be the only playable lead, but Ubisoft's marketing team and creative lead, Serge Haskowit, wouldn't allow it. "Women don't sell," they said. "Honestly, if you have a well-written character, it doesn't matter whether your protagonist is male or female. If word spreads about how good your story and characters are alongside how good your gameplay is, the game will sell." Games like Horizon Zero Dawn, where the protagonist is female, guess what? It sold like over 10 million copies because the game is just good and it was well marketed and word spread about what a great experience it was. That's really what it all comes down to. Jason then added, "Here's an anecdote about Serge Haskowit, one of Ubisoft CEO Yves Guillemot's closest friends and, until his resignation this month, chief creative officer for decades. With one word, Haskowit could greenlight or cancel a game. Devs would spend months preparing for Surge meetings. So powerful was he that meetings were named after this Surge fellow, because so much was riding on his approval of games that were proposed in the company. And that certainly explains why Ubisoft games have felt so stagnant and samey, because they are all made under the umbrella and preferences of this Serge guy, who doesn't seem to have that much of an open mind, has certain predispositions against certain types of games, and we'll dive deeper into that a bit later in the video. Finally, Jason noted that at Ubisoft's headquarters in Paris, when employees complained about the behavior of Tommy Francois, they say they were told it was just Tommy being Tommy. I'll say again, the policies don't matter if the higher-ups, if the people in charge of the company aren't willing to enact them, if they're going to be complacent to the abusive work environment and not do anything about it, despite reports being well known about certain people misbehaving and engaging in misconduct. Jason's string of tweets also links to his article on this matter from July 21st, 2020. Scrolling down, here are a couple of quotes from the article that are worth highlighting. This paragraph reads, "The accusations filed to Ubisoft's Human Resources Department range from subtle forms of sexism to sexual assault, according to two people with access to the reports. In interviews with Bloomberg Business Week, many employees detailed an atmosphere that was hostile toward women, often describing the Paris headquarters as a frat house. Staff openly made misogynist or racist comments across the publisher's various offices, and senior executives took part and escalated the misconduct in the form of inappropriate touching or other sexual advances," current and former employees say. On one occasion before this summer, when Ubisoft sided with an alleged victim, the company removed the woman's boss and rewarded the woman with a gift card, she says. Scrolling further down, the article notes how employees feel as though the family business dynamic of Ubisoft facilitated a culture in which longtime staff, especially Hascoët and his team, were given agency to misbehave. The way a former Ubisoft employee put it is that there are golden children who again just have so much influence that they can just get away with anything. Which is why several employees were pleasantly surprised, even shocked, by the company's swift response to allegations once they were made public in recent weeks, with Hascoët being among those who were ousted from the company. Now this whole section right here is worth highlighting. It details some of Hascoët's misconduct and some of the ways he abused his power. So it reads right here, Hascoët later helped create Ubisoft's editorial team, which supervises every game the company puts out. As head of creative, he oversaw the development of blockbuster franchises including Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Watch Dogs. There's a reason why all three franchises, with the games that have been coming out for them recently, they've all felt very similar in their open world structure. Hascoët was treated almost like a member of the family. He was given ultimate authority to cancel, greenlight, or overhaul any game to his specifications. I don't know how anyone's supposed to take creative risks when they're afraid of not meeting one person's biases and preferences. Project reviews would take place at a time of meeting known within Ubisoft as gates, and Hascoët was usually the gatekeeper. Developers routinely swapped stories of their interactions with Hascoët, who they often portrayed as eccentric or sometimes with less charitable descriptions, according to 7 current or former employees. During presentations, he would bang his head against the table, a sign that he was bored or unhappy. He was infamous for what colleagues described as growling, a sort of guttural noise he would direct at people in meetings or while passing in the hallway. Oh, but it gets worse. 3 women who worked at Ubisoft say they'd been warned not to go out drinking with Hascoët and his crew. He sometimes held business meetings at strip clubs, a habit that his deputies began to adopt, say the employees, who asked not to be identified because they are either still employed at Ubisoft or worried about retribution. The women elected not to attend these outings and said their careers suffered as a result. They were frustrated to watch Hascoët promote many of his strip club buddies to creative directors, a group composed almost entirely of men. Allegations that Hascoët behaved inappropriately around women extended to the office as well. In a meeting at Ubisoft's headquarters in Paris, one of the top creative leads on a big game was presenting to Hascoët and other decision-makers at the company. When the lead, a woman, left the room to use the bathroom, Hascoët pulled up a YouTube video according to 2 people present at the meeting. He played a French song describing sexually explicit acts with a woman who has the same name as the presenter. He hit pause when the employee walked back into the room, say the 2 people, who requested that the woman's name not be printed. As was common in high-level meetings at Ubisoft, there were no other women present. So yeah, the guy, it seems like he was a pretty major asshole, to make a long story short. This segment concludes with Hascoët's reputation had been well known around the company for years, say 10 people who worked there over a period spanning more than a decade. On July 10th, the French newspaper Libération reported that Hascoët had allegedly made sexually explicit comments to staff, pushed subordinates to drink excessively, and gave colleagues cakes containing marijuana without their knowledge. What the hell, dude? Because Hascoët appeared to be immune to HR complaints, employees say they were forced to either find a way to work with him or seek employment elsewhere. Basically, people who complained about some pretty serious misconduct were told, deal with it or get out. How can the policies and systems matter when that was the attitude that the higher-ups had when employees raised these concerns? And as far as the creative side of the company goes, here's what Bloomberg reported. Developers say they were compelled to make big compromises to avoid changes from Hascoët that might be detrimental to their project or result in outright cancellation. For example, Hascoët openly expressed disdain for linear storytelling and cutscenes, the interstitial videos that exist between gameplay to advance the narrative. The writers had to find ways to keep his attention, and often that involved installing a strong male lead, the employees say. So yeah, there's a good reason for why Ubisoft titles just don't seem to think outside the box. The developers had their hands tied by this Hascoët fellow, and the quality and creative integrity of developers' projects suffered as a result of this man and the fear of retribution from him, whether it be these big changes that could drastically and negatively affect a game, or, just Hasco deciding that, yeah, no, I don't like this game, just cut it. And this is something that is highlighted by the Bloomberg article that reads, Ubisoft had developed a reputation in large part because of Hasco for releasing games with similar tropes. Large open-world environments giving the player a list of tasks to accomplish and checkpoints to clear, which is obviously also a more monetizable format of making a game, which no doubt played a large part in why Hasco preferred these types of games. By the end of the year, Ubisoft's stock declined more than 40% from its high a year earlier. As a result of these failures, the company overhauled the editorial department, elevating 7 vice presidents reporting to Hasco. The goal was to distribute Hasco's power and diversify the games, employees say. All 7 vice presidents were men. Belland and Francois were among those promoted, despite a history of misconduct complaints. As for how the CEO of the company has responded to all of this, well, he has taken zero accountability. Yves Guillemot's response reads, "Thank you for your question. In fact, each time we have been made aware of the conduct, we have made actually tough decisions, and we made sure those decisions had a clear and positive impact. So that's very important. It has now become clear that certain individuals betrayed the trust I placed in them and, unintelligible, Ubisoft's shared values. So I have never compromised on my core values and ethics and never will. I will continue to run and transform Ubisoft to face today's and tomorrow's challenges." Well, according to these reports, it sounds like the abusive work culture at the company was a pretty open and well-known thing, and Yves Guillemot sounds like he didn't really step in to do anything. So for him to say, I'm not going to compromise on my core values and ethics, well, assuming these reports are true, you did so the second you decided to not do anything about it. Waiting until this all became a PR nightmare rather than when employees brought these issues up to finally make some changes is not a good look. And Yves Guillemot's inability to say for a second that, yes, this was in large part my fault for, as the leader of this company, not, being attentive enough, like not saying anything like that is a pretty bad look. Now, going back to the creative side of things, one of the projects that was negatively affected by the amount of power that Hasco had held was a title that Dragon Age designer Mike Laidlaw was working on with Ubisoft. Here's what Jason Schreier reported just a couple days ago, just yesterday on July 28th, 2020. Fans have long wondered why Ubisoft hired Dragon Age designer Mike Laidlaw only for him to leave after just a year. The answer? Laidlaw's King Arthur game was cancelled because former Ubisoft creative chief Serge Hasco didn't like the setting. Hasco resigned from Ubisoft in the wake of allegations that he facilitated a culture of sexual harassment. For many years, he also determined Ubisoft's entire portfolio. Why were so many Ubisoft games criticized for feeling so samey? They were all overseen by the same guy. Now Ubisoft has promised big cultural changes, but Hasco's departure also presents an opportunity to restructure the creative editorial department in a way that avoids giving so much power to a single person, allowing for better, more diverse games. The game, Avalon, the one that Mike Laidlaw was working on, was a co-op multiplayer King Arthur RPG inspired heavily by Monster Hunter. People who worked on the project said they were stoked about the team and the progress they'd made. They were infuriated that it was cancelled because Hasco didn't care for the setting. Honestly, this sounds like a really interesting project, something really outside of Ubisoft's usual stuff, and it would have been cool to see Avalon be released and see what Mike Laidlaw's vision was, who is a well-renowned developer in the games industry, but we will never see what would have come out of that because Hasco just decided, I don't like this. Nobody else is going to like it, so let's axe it. And you can see the timeline of this play out with these 2 Polygon articles. So back in December 5th, 2018, Polygon reported that BioWare veteran Mike Laidlaw joins Ubisoft, and then about a year and 2 months later, the same outlet reported Dragon Age creator Mike Laidlaw departs Ubisoft after just a year, published on February 1st, 2020. Additional details about this project were relayed by Jason Schreier's article in Bloomberg. The article reads, Laidlaw was directing development of a role-playing game codenamed Avalon. It was a big-budget adventure involving stories of King Arthur and his round table in a sword and sorcery fantasy world full of knights and legends. But just over a year later, before releasing any games, Laidlaw quit. Avalon was cancelled by Ubisoft's powerful chief creative officer, Serge Hascoët, wielding an unusual amount of control over content. Hascoët wasn't a fan of the fantasy genre and set a high bar for the Avalon team in Quebec City, Canada. If they were going to make a fantasy game, it had to be better than Tolkien, he told them, according to people familiar with the project. Look, within reason, the attitude of, I want to be better than this bar is not a bad attitude to have, but when you take that so far as to kill creative integrity of a project because something doesn't meet your subjective specifications, that's when creativity dies. That's when projects that actually sound interesting from Ubisoft, like Avalon, die. And Hascoët generally just seems to have a negative disposition towards fantasy games, with Bloomberg stating that before Avalon, Hascoët rejected pitches for several other fantasy-style games, according to people familiar with Ubisoft's development process. Here are some more details on the development progress of Avalon before its cancellation. The people who worked on Avalon said the project had been progressing well. It featured a cooperative multiplayer world similar to Capcom's popular Monster Hunter series. The game's developers were shocked to see the project impeded simply because the chief creative officer didn't like its setting, they said. In an effort to salvage the project throughout 2019, Laidlaw and his team pitched new themes. They switched the setting, trying one that was more science fiction and one based on Greek mythology. But Hascoët shot down all of these ideas, and by last fall, the game was cancelled, the people familiar with the project said. Laidlaw left in January. So with Hascoët gone, the hope is that Ubisoft developers won't be so creatively constrained, but I don't know how that will develop over time. Frankly, this last bit from the article doesn't give me too much confidence. It states right here, the company has said Guillemot will temporarily fill the role of chief creative officer, and there is speculation that one of Hascoët's former disciples may eventually take the title. I don't like the sound of that. I think whoever's hired for this position should be as far removed from Hascoët as possible and really bring a fresh new perspective to the position of allowing developers to kind of really just do what they feel is right and be able to pitch things that are varied and different and from all walks of creative life. There's a reason why Sony is killing it in the AAA video games landscape and why Ubisoft has such a negative reputation. Sony actually is more flexible about what projects they support. I mean, they funded Death Stranding, which is a game about a mailman, and they gave that a go, and it yielded something really cool and refreshing and something that maybe not everyone loved, but I still feel like it's a game that's appreciated for, realizing this really bizarre yet unique vision. And stuff like that doesn't happen with a work environment like Ubisoft's and with people like Hascoët. And by recruiting an underling of Hascoët's, I mean, you're kind of setting things up for history to repeat itself. I hope that doesn't end up being the case, and Bloomberg notes that this is just speculation, but still just the general notion of one man having all the creative power at a company that houses a bunch of developers, that is a full-on recipe for creative stagnation, and stagnation has really been the key word associated with Ubisoft, with all of their recent releases pretty much feeling like the same game, but with a different coat of paint. It's hard to say for sure how all of this will pan out, but I really hope Ubisoft is considering giving this position to someone fresh and new, and also giving the position as a whole just less power in general. That's what a lot of people are saying, in fact. According to Bloomberg, some observers, both inside and out of Ubisoft, say that diffusing power at the company instead may lead to stronger and more successful games. I couldn't agree more. But the most important thing to note is that games are ultimately made by talent, and if the talent don't feel safe or comfortable in their work environment, if they don't feel happy, then they're not going to do their best work. And so ousting people like Hascoët and other executives who've been abusive and engaging in clear misconduct and just egregious, awful behavior, ousting them and ensuring that the work environment, the quality of life there improves, that is the real true first step. And then after that, diffusing creative control across multiple parties and just giving people more creative room to breathe, that comes next. It at least does sound like Ubisoft isn't just sitting down and twiddling their thumbs and doing nothing. Like, the ousting of Hesquid really is a huge deal for the company. It actually does sound like they're taking certain necessary steps, and some employees do seem to be pleasantly surprised by the swiftness of Ubisoft's response to all this. But the question remains, will it be enough? Will Ubisoft overhaul the company enough to ensure that stuff like this does not happen again, and to ensure that creative flexibility is enacted within the company? And just in general, will they do enough to keep employees and the talent happy and creatively fulfilled? That's where things are left up in the air. So that's one man's take on everything going on with Ubisoft. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on Ubisoft's latest reactions and the way they've been changing things at the company, and what your prospects are for Ubisoft's future. Drop a comment, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.